near and far. My name is Asia Freeman. I'm the artistic director of Bunnell Street Art Center, which is situated on Indigenous land. It's all Indigenous land here, and specifically in this area, it's Dena'ina land. Bunnell occupies part of the Ninilchik Village Tribe's land here at the mouth of Ketchimack Bay, called Kachikmak by the Sugpiaq people who are across the water. We're grateful to be in this beautiful place that's been stewarded for thousands of years, since time immemorial, by the Indigenous people of this region. And it's very important to Bunnell. It's central to our work to lean into and support the leadership and the artistic vision of Indigenous artists in Alaska and beyond. This month, with support from National Performance Network, we've been really pleased to have artist in residence Nina Elder, who spends time in Alaska every year out in the Wrangles, and also has a home in the Albuquerque area. In framing the conversation today, Nina's going to talk about her fascination with materials, fraying materials found from the beach, lines and tension, release and mending. And joining us is her good friend, co-conspirator, collaborator at times, Billy Joe Miller, who's also from Albuquerque. So welcome, Nina, and welcome, Billy Joe.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just so thrilled to be here. I'm acutely aware that time is fluid and has different viscosities in different times and places. And this month in Homer has just flown by. I think a lot of people thought I was crazy that I wanted to come to Alaska in winter. And I know why now, because it's just been a stunningly beautiful month. The generosity of the community around the Bunnell Street Art Center is extraordinary. Even during COVID, it could have been a really challenging time. And I've had just a really wonderful experience. And so, yeah, thank you to both of the Breeze and to Asia and to Adele. I really appreciate all the support. And I'm so excited that in talking about inspiration and really kind of trying to figure out how these complex projects happen, I was like, there's a person that I've really, really been thinking about every day since I've been here and since I started this vein of work, and that's Billy Joe Miller. And so even though he's not been to Homer per se, and he's been in my heart this month and a big inspiration, so I'm really excited just to kind of have him in this conversation to help tease out some of the themes. Do you want to say hi, Billy Joe?
Yes. Hi from the East Mountains of Albuquerque. We're kind of on the backside, like there's Albuquerque and there's mountains, and then we're behind. And I'm on the unceded land of the Tano, Tiwa, Jicarilla, and Comanche people. It was really neat actually to talk to a friend, Moises Gonzalez, because I wanted to know more than that I was on the land of the Tiwa people, and it was really cool to get stories from him. And now, and this was for this meeting, I just wanted to have more of a sense of where I was. And he's going to come to our house and give a talk now for the neighbors. So I'm really excited about that. And I've been doing well. I've been mostly in the forest for the pandemic, so I'm very lucky. I've been going inward and working on a lot of proposals. And Nina being in Alaska, every time Nina's in Alaska, it's sort of like a pain because I've been there with her, and it changed my life. It was an incredibly expensive time, and beautiful that part of that was our friendship blooming. So yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Awesome.
Thank you both. I really appreciate the opportunity to expand the discussion by the sort of repartee between the two of you, and also anybody who's joined us with questions that you might have, and relationships that you all share creatively.
Yeah.
So, Nina, I just want to start with a question here. You've been writing about this recently. You stopped depicting sites of extreme environmental devastation, and you're wanting to create work that pulls people into the poetic space of potential, the finding that personal trajectory toward understanding, and the metaphors of repair that are in the shattered rock and the frayed and line. What prompted this shift? And I know that's part of what you and Billy share as a theme, so I'm interested to hear more about that shift.
Yeah, so for years, I've been really blessed and privileged with access to amazing climate scientists. I think it's partially just where I hang out. The Wrangell St. Elias Wilderness is full of incredible science all the time, and that's where I've been living in the summer. Anchorage also has a ton of climate scientists, so you could just socialize anytime and end up learning an immense amount about, glacial hydrology or surface melt on the Greenlandic ice cap or something. So it's become something that has become part of the fabric of how I think. And for a long time, I was making work trying to depict that gravitas, that hugeness, the interruption of the natural world. And making really big drawings, site-specific materials of things like clear-cut forests and pit mines and bomb craters and signs of big devastation. And I mean, it really started about 3 or 4 years ago, but it's really come to a head recently. But where I saw this potential to reflect more on how people are relating to their environment and how people behave in their day in, day out lives and what they find poetry in, and that is less overwhelming than like big, huge data sets coming out of climate science or my drawings of a huge pit mine. And that, as a borderline activist, I would like to think that some of my work inspires behavioral change to be better stewards of the natural environment and each other. And I realized that needed more personal interaction. So part of when Billy, Joe, and we traveled together for a month on the Alaska Ferry system, was that 4 years ago now, Billy, Joe?
I guess this spring, yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it seems timeless in some ways, but I think there was this big shift where we all realized that it was the conversations that we were having with one another and these one-on-one interactions in communities that were actually so much more powerful than trying to do like big, huge public events or creating these standalone art objects that could speak for the complex issues that all of us were facing in our work. And that sometimes those smaller conversations and smaller interactions had much greater reverberation than like walking by a piece of art in a museum that you're only going to look at for 6 seconds. And so that was just a huge shift for me that's taken a while to show up in physical form in my drawings, but it definitely changed the way I was working in communities. And so I could show a couple examples of that. I'm just going to kind of bop around in screen share. I have a, let's see.
Mm-hmm.
Why is this not? Okay, share.
Yeah.
Are you seeing my screen now?
That would be great to see some.
Yeah. So I think, are you seeing this, Asia? Are you seeing my screen?
For me, it's loading.
Oh, okay.
I've got it here.
Okay, thanks. So yeah, these are just some
Great. So yeah, carry on.
These are just some older examples of work. of that kind of trying to express the overwhelming devastation of the natural world. This is the Sedan crater at the Nevada nuclear test site. It's the largest explosion-based hole on the planet. It's 1/2 mile deep. And I actually got security clearance to go and visit the site and be able to spend time with that hole. This is one of the Kennecott mines. This one's in Peru. It's, I think, about 180 square miles at the Yanacocha mine. These are some of the dredge piles in near Dawson City up in the Yukon. I got to live there several years ago for a couple months through a residency, and these piles go on for just miles and miles and miles. Clear-cut forests. So those are just some examples of like the really kind of big, nasty stuff that I was dealing with. Yeah, I don't know if you want to say anything about that kind of intimate scale, Billy Joe, because I feel like we've talked so much about what actually transforms people, and then I can show some examples of the more recent work I've done, but I would just love to hear you say something about the work that you've done that feels transformative.
Well, speaking to the work we did together in Alaska, for me, it was a really big deal to learn about climate change in the area where it was happening, and learn about the people like right there. We made a reader, which was, I think, one of the like really magical things or powerful things of our trip together, was all of us contributed before we left with things we thought that would be interesting for us to read, and sort of have a book club every 3 days together. So we would be in the landscape, we'd be reading these different articles, and having those articles ignited, and a lot of them were about, you know, the incredible value and vulnerability of Alaska. To like be reading it and like seeing it was really profound for me, and also to have that that really intimate connection with the same group. I think it's really worthwhile to consider like the traveling group. I mean, there's the tourism of it. There's just so many aspects of it. And yeah, so in terms of transformation, I was like in a new place, making new friends. And I'm really grateful that that was my introduction to Alaska. It was just so thoughtful. And
so the project we did together, I helped put it together, was a 5-person artist residency organized through the Island Institute, which is in Sitka, Alaska. And we worked around this concept of signal to noise, which in recording technology terms is like the amount of desired sound versus background noise. But we were using that as a metaphor for, you know, desired, you know, nature versus climate change, or indigenous knowledge versus scientific knowledge, you know, all these spaces where there's tension and where our focal points go. And it was a really, yeah, it changed all of our lives, which I guess is like why Billy Joe's here today, because it's like, oh, this is the beginning of so many things. So
Yeah, I'm really interested in hearing about the impact, the transformative impact of working in, you know, in Alaska's wild places on Indigenous land. For years, you've pursued investigations in the Wrangles, and I understand Billy has been a part of that on Dene or Athabascan land, Indigenous land. And as your earlier images show, the colonial story of impact and extraction is really huge, but in here it's still very much raw and ongoing. And as you move toward these themes of mending and repair in your work, as both of you do even, um, I'm I'm really curious about your views around land acknowledgement. I think it rests on white people, on settler individuals or institutions to acknowledge that long-term stewardship of Indigenous land. And how are you feeling about that or expressing that through your work?
Well, I remember the first time I heard the word decolonizing. I remember it clear as day. Or maybe it was the first time I really thought about it. Maybe I had heard it before, but to me it was like, and I had been a student of what colonialism has done to the landscape. It's been a huge part of my work since before I'm making anything that looks like what I'm making came to exist. And I had this hit of like, you cannot fill in a pit mine. So you can't unmine a landscape. You cannot heal trauma without a scar tissue. So how can we ever say we can decolonize? I just found the word itself like jarring and stunningly inaccurate, because colonialization has been such a dominant force, and it has changed every single thing in the world. And so through conversations a couple years ago with Melissa Shaganoff, we were both working at the Anchorage Museum. We came up with this idea of that we need to be doing a hospice work for the colonial apparatus. We need to allow it to die, and we need to recognize its impacts, but we also need to look towards what comes next. And just like with any death, there's like grief, but then you have to put everything back together. And so she and I were talking a lot. I was like using the word hospice. She was using the word potlatch. She's Indigenous Alaskan and like one of the most extraordinary knowledge bearers I've ever learned from. And so for me, that was a huge transition towards not wanting to dwell in the past, but thinking about what will come and how to make work that welcomes in futures that have, I don't think you can decolonize, but we can work towards having less white supremacist and racist power. And it's just a huge process. It's not like you get to like put a punctuation point at the end of the sentence and be like, we're done here.
Yeah,
so
and I want to talk more about that, but I'm really curious because in a sense, colonialism is a big kind of hegemonic view. It's a totalizing discourse. It is about extraction and using things up and then going on to the next, layer by layer, if you will, through the earth and through time. And I think that there's a lot of different things that can be colonized in addition to land that have to do with mind and body, and speak to that systematic way in which the process of control plays out. But I understand that is something that the concern about like recovery from that and what recovery looks like is this really shared theme between the two of you, at least, that you've talked about, and Billy Joe has done work in that as well. And so I wonder, Billy Joe, if you could speak a bit to the impact of like totalizing discourses in your life, or what is the impetus looking into your work that shifts you toward healing, that shifts you toward addressing trauma and guiding people through art and other forms that Nina has referred to.
Thanks for that question. To answer that question right now, it feels natural to go back to where I came from, which was a very white, very conservative Christian situation. And And so because of that and going through the years of trauma with the separation from it, a lot of my work is specific to wanting inclusive sanctuary space. And I've been just lucky out of my mind to be able to do some of this work in Albuquerque. And yeah, it's work that I want to keep doing. I was telling Nina today, I think maybe I was going to go in the wrong direction or a different direction, but yeah, inclusive sanctuary space. And so when I grew up, when I was connecting to communities, it was like through very specific fundamentalist approaches, lots of rule following, and but somewhere, you know, different things in there. There was humanity and there was beauty and inspiration. And so I feel like now my biggest interest is finding ways that we can meet. And one of the projects that's been the most profound for me was in the Albuquerque's International District. I worked with Artful Life on a 7-month-long project, and I was in for once or twice a week for sometimes 4 or 5 hours. I was in a room with the most diverse group of people I've ever met. And at first I remember a kind of panic with there were lots of people who didn't speak English well. There were cultural barriers. I normally come at everyone with a big hug, and there were people in there that didn't want a big hug or even my direct eye contact, you know. And so it was really just incredible to learn how to communicate through art and how we transcended language with art, and we're able to meet. And by the end of the time, we were all connected. And I'm just forever in shock. And that led to quite a few other projects in the International District. And it's a theme in my work. I want to make space, like public space, whatever is like the crazy thing in the cathedral. I want that out on the street. I'm really interested in that.
Can you show us an example of that, Billy?
Sure.
I would love to see an example of what that looks like to bring that sacred fragment of a cathedral out into the public space.
Well, I'm gonna.
I love the complexity of the word sanctuary too. Like it's one of these words that just holds so much both tension and sanctity. You know, it's like Billy Joe and I love these things that have so many different interpretations and can be problems or joys, and sanctuary as a word is definitely one.
Yeah, and I like even want to be thoughtful about that word, because it can mean so many things to so many people, and some people don't even want to hear it because it has a religious connotation. So what I'm going to show you is the project that I was just talking. It's called Stories of Route 66 International District. And you get to see the people I was just talking about. So I'm gonna take over the screen.
And while we're making that transition, tell me about where this is located. You said, is this in Albuquerque?
Yes, so just on the other side of the mountain in the International District, and I lived down the street from this spot for 11 years. So there were 4 artists. There was one director, Valerie Martinez, and then there were 4 artists in the group who helped facilitate leading activities. And this is all the group. And So many things came from this project, but it was a big grant from the NEA, and Morning Glory was one of the 3 major projects that came from it. And so over 7 months, we met with the community and did activities together every Sunday. And during those activities, I wish this whole platform could be repeated in many other areas, just because it was so unreal how the community got to be involved in what you're seeing right now. So first, we had activities to connect and break those language barriers. And then in those activities, we also shared possibilities, like, what do you want to see in your neighborhood? What do you want to be in your neighborhood? And one of the voiced things was some sort of monument or shelter. And then we got really into public art and shared all these kinds of images, and then people would vote towards different images that were more appealing to them. And then, yeah, I won't take up the whole show with this, but it was just a gorgeous, long process turned into 3 models that I made with a designer friend after, many questionnaires and sketches and people talking about what sanctuary was to them. We built these 3 models, and then the community, I was in the room, and none of the main artists voted. The community voted. And when they voted on Morning Glory, I just got chills through my whole body. But I never knew this would happen, this crazy structure. So this is part of all of it happening. And now it's a permanently right on Central in this neighborhood, and people have pride in it, and it hasn't been vandalized yet. I can't believe it. That was 3 years ago.
Wow.
But
And
I'll
tell
stop
us
there.
what it's made of. What is this? I want to hear just about what the structure is made of. It looks like glass and steel.
So that's industrial acrylic, which I think is a material that gets not enough use. It's a really powerful material, and for me, the shadow is kind of everything with this material. So yes, just metal and acrylic, and a whole lot of people. Nina Du Bois is an incredible artist who was a big part of this. Here's the ribbon cutting. It's just 8 seconds. But just a lot of happy people. So, yeah.
Wow, wonderful. It's fabulous to see what you've been able to do in community, and you speak to kind of like this porous process where you're using, writing and feedback and sketching and layers to create work. I'm interested in hearing from each of you about, as white artists, where do you draw a line between lifting up and supporting the voices of the community and holding the stage in conversations about inclusivity? In a sense, giving that stage up to leadership that is and always has been present, perhaps quietly, perhaps differently than white leadership. How do you do that work in ways that feel, what feels right to you? And talk about your process, if you will, Billy Joe, and then I'd love to hear from Nina about that.
Yeah. I just think empathy is where to start. I was talking about that with Nina today. And well, with me, with all of these projects, I'm around so many incredible people, and from such diverse backgrounds. And so I've been really fortunate to work with such a strong community, which isn't always the case. so when it's not the case that there's an like a built-in integrity, you have to be
Mhm.
yeah, just so vigilant yourself about how you're interacting with people, and how you can share, how you can get people to share their power and authorship. And it's really like, I've been so fortunate with this project, because I lived in the neighborhood and then this happened, and I had these connections and then was really pushed to bring them farther. And so going forward into all my projects, I'm always looking for how to collaborate. And to be honest, collaboration is just, when it's done right, it's such a lovely gift to pull away and and see what happens together, instead of having a preconceived idea and using that to dictate the project.
Mhm. I think that's something I've just learned so much, is not dictating an outcome, which is so hard as artists. Like, we are told, oh, to be a successful artist, you have to come up with this brilliant idea and then, against all the odds, push your idea out there. There's a certain arrogance or just pushing, cutthroat, dog eat dog thing that we're like sort of trained into as artists, that I really want to Billy Joe, do you want to not screen share, or do you want to keep screen sharing?
Oh, I was just gonna stop somewhere else.
Okay, that's totally fine. But I've had the experience several times recently. This comes from being white, but it also comes from being someone that travels to make my work a lot. And I'm often in communities where I don't belong, on many, many, many levels, where I've had to stop a project, and either just completely cancel it out for myself and for it moving forward, because it's not appropriate for an outsider to be working on something, or you know, starting to create something and realizing it's better handed off to someone from within a community. And I will give shouts out to the, organizers and museums and cultural organizations that I've worked with, that understand that sometimes it's not appropriate to bring in an outsider to comment on something that's really vulnerable in a community. And as an artist that's working a lot with climate change and the impacts of industry on land, those are often along racial lines. And that's usually the thing that people don't want to talk about, are the different ways of, the different ways that environmental injustice is also racial injustice. And so often my work ends up going into that space. And it ends up being something that I'm not really prepared to comment on with my own creativity. So I'm really thankful that sometimes I can just go as a learner and a student, and I can experience something. And I think it's really flawed in the art world to expect an artist just to show up and be able to respond to something and make something really quickly. It's a problem with residencies. And like Billy Joe's work, he's working in communities that he lives in, I, on the other hand, I'm working in communities where I'm visiting, and it's a challenge. And I guess I have to be prepared to lose authorship, fail, maybe not make something, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Let's
look at some. Oh, go ahead. What's your question, Nina? Go ahead.
As a residency director and someone that's bringing people in to engage and doing the work you're doing with the colonial impacts, I guess I just would love to hear you say something about your role as an administrator and your goals in facilitating community engagement, because I think you do a great job. And
But it's a really, it's like a constant learning process, and there's a lot of like errors, kind of big and small, along the way. One thing that you know I'm learning is that it shouldn't be a surprise. I mean, I started out, um, helping to establish this organization as an artist who, like many, just wanted to see more spaces for artists to share work. Um, but shifting the conversation to how are artists leading these conversations, and especially on a more local and indigenous level, what can we do to lean into those ideas and inclinations and initiatives that artists bring forward? So in selecting visiting artists, we're often really thinking about, well, what new strategies do they have to draw out and give stage and space for voices within the community to come forward and participate?
Mhm.
And so that work is getting more, more nuanced and more important as time goes by.
Mhm. And more challenging during COVID. I mean, as your current artist in residence, speak to that the work I've done here has felt very different than it would in different times, because of all of the work that I've done around sensitivity feels like it's being rearranged right now, because of COVID and being able to talk to people. It's just different.
Yeah. Let's switch to some images on your screen, Nina, of work that you have been making. And I want to explore a little bit more about the different nature that your work feels like it is exploring now because of COVID, and how that's impinged on maybe expectations or sort of traditions, rituals of connection that have been intrinsic to you. I mean, you've spent a lot of this residency working in a pretty high degree of isolation socially.
Yeah. Well, I will say I was a little freaked out coming here, because New Mexico, where I've spent a lot of the pandemic, has one of the highest, structures and plans for personal isolation. And then when I got off the plane here, I was like, oh my gosh, there's people in public not wearing masks. And I was really scared, honestly. But then it's been awesome to have workspace, and to feel like I can do productive work. A lot of the community-based work that I would have loved to have worked through hasn't happened, but I've found ways to, work with these metaphors. I have this poem that just informs all I would do, but I don't know if there's time to read it right now. I might come back to that and read it. But yeah, so I guess I've been really, really aware of some of the fraying and fracturing that's happening societally and environmentally in the past 4 years, and then especially during the pandemic. And so I kind of came with this idea of like, oh, I'm going to make work about fraying ropes and rope waste. And so when I got here, I asked people to bring me objects that they'd found on the beach, ropes that they had special relationships with. And I had a couple really cool interactions, but I realized it was just much more rich due to the COVID situation to go out and to be responding to what I could do through sensorial research. And so I found, anyone that's been in the marinas and the dry docks here know that there's no shortage of incredible ropes. But I think what's been really intense making these drawings for me is choosing to not depict the environment, to not depict what these ropes are tied to. So it leaves a lot of mystery about what is holding the tension, what is doing the fraying. They are kind of without direction, and so you can't tell what's going on. But something I realized is that the only reason we have ropes is because we need to connect something that we value with something that we believe is stable, and that there's something that makes that relationship challenging. And that's why these frays happen, is because sometimes the connection between what we value and what is real and solid is sometimes violent and sometimes disruptive, and sometimes it needs to be disrupted. This is an interesting thing, this monkey's fist knot. It's a rope that someone brought me, and I have it here in the gallery. And a few people have picked up the actual object and said, oh, this rope is far too light for this knot to be tied in it. Like, they can see why it frayed and why it broke, and it's the wrong kind of rope to be tying. So this kind of knot is what you use to throw a heavy weight of rope towards something else, and it's heavy enough that a lot of weight of rope can follow it. And I just find it really fascinating that there's this local knowledge that is really specific. It's about how to get a large amount of rope from the shore onto a boat. But then to me, it's also like, the way my brain works is, what kind of weights are we creating? Like, what kind of anchor points are we creating in what we believe that we can transfer to something else? And the past 2 months especially, I guess I've just had a lot of concern about folks that are like white supremacist. If they come to understand the negative impact of their beliefs and these things that they've anchored themselves to, how are they going to unmoor themselves from that? Or I've been thinking about this for years, all of us that are so dependent on extractive industries, when we start changing our behavior patterns, it's going to feel like a huge unraveling of life and a huge unanchoring. And so for me, these drawings are like not about rope. They're about understanding that sometimes we need to let things fray, and we need to let what binds us break. And then other times we need to bind ourselves so closely. Yeah, I guess I can show you this drawing that I'm working on behind me. This is just something, these are not as big of drawings as some, but
What is that one about, like 30 by 30 inches or something? I'm trying to.
This one's 30 by 30. Wow, Aisha, you have a good eye. That's amazing.
I know that space like my body, those dimensions. Okay, yeah. So that's a really interesting kind of like positive, negative space situation.
Just to talk a little bit about the materials I'm using. This really black background is marine grade graphite. And the first drawing I did while I was here, it was really interesting looking because the grease, the graphite grease, is just shiny grease basically, but it was starting to sag on the paper and it just didn't work. Anyone that's worked in oil paint in a humid climate might know what I'm talking about, where it starts to sag before it dries. And it was crazy on paper, something that could do that. So I figured out I could mix charcoal into the grease and it gives this shiny black matte thing. So I stencil out this space, rub in the background, and then peel the stencil off and then start drawing. So by the time this is finished, it'll all be detailed like that, but down here. So
beautiful. Yeah, that's beautiful. I do like that, the sort of span that you're kind of encompassing in this stage, even if you surrender most of it, but still like anchoring from like white space into black space, from, spanning that and not, the more that you surrender that white space, it moves to the midground, but I love how it's pulling in these two directions right now. And that tension is very intriguing.
Yeah, I was telling Billy Joe this morning that I had kind of I'm not like a super emotional person, and I'm usually moved like by the time I'm making my art, I've usually thought about it so thoroughly that I don't have like some emotional breakthrough from my own art, but I totally had one of those emotional moments in the studio while I was working on this one. And because I just decided, like, there had been all this stuff that the rope was tied to, and I decided to just blank that out. And all of a sudden I was having this internal conversation about, like, what am I anchored to that I don't know is there? You know, what in my mental health chemistry, what in my family's legacies, what in my body that I might not know is there, am I still anchored to? And it just kind of hit me so hard. And I don't know, what Billy Joe and I were talking about this morning was like the sense of like, we don't know what other people are going through. And we still have to see that they're tethered to things that they don't even know about themselves. And what a profound form of empathy that is to I always assume people that are behaving in ways that they're choosing. And there's so much that is inherent and systemic in our bodies and in our lives. And I don't know, I just want to be a lot more open to that.
You're so incredibly brave. Like, you're drawn right to the tension point. And I want to speak to that in light of a recent post that you made. You posted about the frustration you feel toward institutions that aren't doing the work of inviting BIPOC people to the table for art panels, for adjudications, things like this. And you do that work often. And you spoke about now feeling that pressure to do the work of helping institutions become inclusive by connecting them to BIPOC leaders. It's a point that I take with a lot of sensitivity in the context of Alaska. There's really this long and traumatic work that BIPOC leaders have been, enduring and trying to rise within a system that sometimes puts them in the position of competing with well-intentioned white artists. And so the tension is exacerbated by that competition, and the traumas are still really fresh here. When you made that really bold statement about this work that you are doing here in Alaska, and through the post, who were you speaking to? Who is your audience?
Definitely administrators and funders. I know that being an artist is already kind of a form of double work, where we're having to exist in society and then we're choosing to communicate things from outside of the mainstream. And so that, to me, that's like a double work. And then if you add being a person of color or Indigenous or not able-bodied or a mom or a dad, like there's all these things that kind of add another layer of work. And we can just kind of see this exponential kaleidoscope of work that gets added on top of people. And what I've been responding to a lot lately is that when a person says, hey, you're overburdening the system for these people of color or these people in this neighborhood or whatever, if someone speaks out, usually in my experience, the funder or the organizer says, oh, can you do the work to tell us how? Oh, can you do the work to help us remedy the situation? Oh, can you do the work? And I want to put my foot down and say, if someone is getting paid to run a cultural institution, they should not be exhibiting unless they're ready to do the work to exhibit challenging and diverse work. They can't say they're doing it if they're not, and they can't depend on the triple and quadruply overworked constituents that probably make up their most diverse artists, And so that's where I'm just, as a white artist who's has the privilege to speak in those spaces, I'm putting my foot down and I'm doing it loudly, and I'm being called a problematic artist sometimes. And I'm very willing to be that problem. If it's a problem, I don't think it's a problem. I think I'm just asking people to do their job in the time we're in, you know?
Mhm.
So,
Thanks for
and
that explanation.
I also want artists who feel overburdened to also say, I'm overburdened. Like, don't ask me to do that work.
Mhm.
That should be the role of the institution.
Mhm. I want to shift to a question to you both that came from one of our listeners, Dale. Dale, can I invite you to unmute and articulate that rich question, which is sort of long, and I'm afraid that I'll. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Well, I've followed Nina's work for a few years and just find it incredibly profound all the time. And this work is like no exception. Conversations with her and other artists that, our brains and the cultures that reflect our brains are always trying to eliminate information, right? They're trying to save us time. They're trying to limit our actions and our reactions and our perceptions and just load everything with meanings that are automatic that we don't have to question. And what artists do, it seems to me, is that they say, yeah, but what are we missing? Kind of what Nina was just articulating, what could we be missing by just thinking of things in these conventional terms? And absolutely, as Billy Joel said, the sort of history of colonialism is epic. And Asia, you too, that we keep mining. We mine people, we mine resources, we mine time, we mine the planet. We use it up and we discard it and we look for the next thing we can colonize. And artists are doing such a great job of sort of, Nina, your point that, the hospice of colonialism is such an incredible idea that things are fraying and things are wearing out. And the ties that tether us to all those assumptions are really beginning to tear. And that maybe colonialism is dying. We're in the last throes of late stage capitalism and late stage colonialism. And there could be something to look forward to. So going back to my question, like that's the context, right? And of what artists do really well, better than almost any other kind of dialogue, because they can step out of the conventional. Even scientists and engineers have a hard time doing that. And I'm one of them. I'm both of those things, scientist, engineer. So I know that feeling. But in the very beginning of this exchange, you both hit on the dialogue, the quality of the dialogue, the quality of the learning, the quality of maybe the leaps, the conceptual leaps that you made together when you were face-to-face and there was face-to-face dialogues taking place. I've had that experience with works of art. In other words, when I've entered into a dialogue with a dance performance, a poem, literature, a painting, one of Nina's drawings, the profound thing that usually happens to me is that it takes me where I've never been before. And I start a dialogue of, what could I be missing? But I wonder, you two suggested that maybe there's a quality of, there are things in common with both kinds of dialogues, being in dialogue with a work of art by yourself and then being in dialogue with another human being. Where do those two things overlap and how are they different? Artist's point of view, from a creative point of view. That was the question.
You go, Billy.
Okay. Well, first, I want to acknowledge that my art mom is with us, Michelle Montjoy. After the Zoom, I highly recommend checking out her work. It's bananas. And she's so responsible for so much of my work, or she's had a big impact on my work. And she does fibers and rope stuff. So it's like a cool I didn't know you'd be here, Michelle. I love you. Thank you. Um, thank you for your question, Dale. I love what you said. A lot of it sets me off in different directions. But it reminds me of something that me and Nina were kind of just talking about earlier that's kind of funny. She was saying, I forget the total contents, but she was saying how sometimes I come to things and I'm like half spectral. And then I said, yeah, it's like on Photoshop, you have your opacity you can bring to a certain percentage. And that's something I'm really interested in, is like, how can I, appropriately turn my opacity to 50% to let the other things in. And it's just, it tends to be a gift because if you're open, then there's this really incredible power. I mean, in connecting with others, and oftentimes, something I've been grateful for is just letting someone, have the space, and oftentimes it's about doing this, and just letting
There you go.
somebody else step in. Yeah, and there's all kinds of work. There's the work that's more personal. I've been doing public art pieces this year that were really more inner, especially I think inspired by COVID. I've just really gone inward, which has been I'm very privileged and lucky that I've been able to like have space and time to like super go inside. And so it's been neat to make that kind of work. And yet it's been public art. So it's exciting for me that anyone could walk up to it, and have it and might set off an experience. And someone wrote me some emails about some of the work that I didn't know at all. And I love that when people reach out. And so if someone reaches out, I try to be as generous as I can. And I'm always looking at how I can get my opacity down.
But you're no ghost. I love, oh my gosh, this idea of approaching people the way we approach art, because I think when we look at art, we don't expect anything of it, but we hope for a positive experience. And also we're aware that someone intentionally made art. But I think when we approach humans, we sometimes don't realize that they are there with intention and with a really wild materials list of how they came to that place. It's like art has this way of labeling it, like this is made out of charcoal on paper, made this year, but humans don't come with those labels. So we don't see each other as rich and full of components. And I actually find an easier time getting swept away by art than I do by humans, because I don't expect the best of humans. And I really would like to. Oh my gosh, I have so many biases, and I would really like to approach humans the same way I do art. Like, you're here for a reason. Somebody wants you to be here, and you're here to do something. And I'm going to try to figure out what you're here to do. Like, that would be that's how I think about art. And I would just love it if I approached humans that way. I usually think like, oh man, what problem is this person creating? But says the total introvert. That's
a beautiful point.
I'm going to be thinking about that for a while, Dale. Thank you for that.
Well, I'm also going to be thinking about, it is an excellent question, Dale. It's really rich, but I'm also going to be thinking about your point, Nina, that art is teaching you about how to approach humans. And that really speaks to why some people need to make it. It's their native language, and it's essential to do the work, to have that practice physically, emotionally, lots of levels, in
Right.
order to understand their relationship to the world.
Mhm. Well, I think I've had so many people say, because if you meet me, I'm kind of a physical spaz. I talk with my hands, I throw my head back and laugh. I'm a total spaz, but then I make these super meticulous drawings. And for me, it was like this way of bringing my body and my brain and my vision together, that because I have a very contemplative and nitpicky mind. And so to let my process be my teacher has been a huge lesson that I'm really thankful for.
Yeah. Thank you. It's been so wonderful to speak with you both today, Nina Elder and Billy Joe Miller. Thank you for joining us for this hour of inspiration and adaptation.
Thank you all.
And yeah,
Be well, everybody.
Thank you.
absolutely. Be well. Take care.
Nina, are you going to be in the gallery this afternoon?
I will be, except for